Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host TJ Mabarty. Happy Friday. We are coming to you live. Today is July 5th. Hope everybody had a great holiday. But it is back to business here at the GSMC Sports Podcast. So today we are going to be diving into the offseason of the Golden State Warriors, who just yesterday made an addition to their roster, trading for Buddy Hield, and we'll talk about sort of what that means for the Warriors here moving forward as they are going to be headed into a little bit of a new era without Klay Thompson, so we will be diving into that. We are also going to be covering where the 76ers stand in the Eastern Conference after they, of course, made the signing of Paul George that has put them back into the conversation of being a title contender. Not that they were ever necessarily entirely out of that conversation, but just sort of evaluating where they stand in the hierarchy of the NBA. We're going to come to you with the latest on the rumors surrounding All-Star Brandon Ingram and what types of teams he could end up with if the Pelicans do decide to trade him. The Summer League is kicking off tomorrow, so I want to just lay out what the schedule looks like and what some of the top storylines are. And finally, we're going to be wrapping up the show with a little bit of baseball talk, talking about the Boston Red Sox and where they stand after they just completed a sweep of the Marlins. They are in great positioning for making the playoffs, and whether or not they're going to be making any types of moves at the trade deadline in order to bolster their chances there. But before we get into all of that, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. To any of our viewers, be sure to use the comment section. Give us your thoughts on all of the latest happenings in sports as we try and make this show as interactive as possible. And if you would consider leaving a tip or donation, you can use the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker, gsmcpodcast.net. Anything would be greatly appreciated there. The Warriors are headed into a little bit of a new direction here after losing Klay Thompson in a sign and trade to the Dallas Mavericks. And while they did lose him, it was kind of their decision as well, because Klay Thompson, it's been reported that they were seeking just about $20 million per year, which ultimately really isn't that much money to be dishing out, especially in comparison to feel like what the ideas of his expectations were during the regular season. $20 million really wasn't all that much, but the Warriors were not willing to pay that, and ultimately he is on his way to Dallas. So we have a new iteration of the Warriors for next year, and they have made some moves so far this offseason. Just yesterday, we got the news that they are doing a sign and trade with the Philadelphia 76ers to acquire Buddy Hield. They ultimately send a second-round pick that's initially from Dallas. I think it's in 2031. So down the road, pretty much no cost for the Warriors there. Contract details around this are a little bit weird. The first two seasons are fully guaranteed, where he's going to be making $18 million. It's a little bit of a steal in terms of value, I at least think. I know that Buddy Hield isn't this, franchise-changing player, but he's one of the best shooters in the NBA, and I think he's going to fit really well into the system that they have there in Golden State. There's partially guaranteed money for Hield in the 2026-27 season, and then there is a player option for some non-guaranteed money in a fourth season. So again, some of the details there are a little bit shaky. We will definitely keep you updated with them as we get more of a clear picture as to what that means. But I do really like the addition of Buddy Hield for the Warriors. They are going to be playing through Curry, of course, and Hield is somebody who I think can be a threat off the ball, who has shot 40% from the three-point line throughout his career on 7.6 attempts per game, so a pretty good sample size and volume there that Hield is going to be a reliable shooter for them. And the obviously it didn't work out for him in Philadelphia. The 76ers traded for him at the deadline in February, and it started off really hot there in Philly, at least with Buddy Hield, a couple big performances, but ultimately it just didn't work out. And by the playoffs, he was somebody who wasn't even really a consistent rotational player for them in the postseason. And I think that the 76ers did mishandle that a little bit. Now, obviously, Nick Nurse is one of the best coaches in the NBA, so he knows what he's doing, absolutely. But it was very strange to me where games 1 through 3, Buddy Hield scored a total of just 2 points and took only 4 3-pointers. This is somebody that you brought in for the shooting and the extra amount of scoring, and he wasn't even really getting the types of looks that make him, he's make or break almost by the 3-point shot. It's not like he's an excellent defender or a great rebounder, but it's not even like he was shooting bad. He just wasn't even shooting. So, he ends up getting DNPs in games 4 and 5, and then game 6 he got some minutes late in the second quarter. And he ended up going, ballistic for a bit there. 17 points in the first half and knocked down 6 3-pointers in the game. But even then, they waited a while into the second half after seeing what he did in the first half to actually insert him back into the lineup. So, ultimately, it was just a failed experiment there. It was pretty low cost for the 76ers to make the deal in the first place. It's not something they're going to be losing sleep over. But even in that last game, the last time we saw him, knocked down 6 threes. I think that he is going to be able to still have that 3-point shot, and the Warriors are going to be able to utilize him in a better way than the 76ers did. So he is, play style-wise, kind of a replacement for Klay Thompson. Not that you're ever going to replace the prime years of Klay or anything like that. NBA Twitter, as Nelson of our basketball podcast pointed out, has been sort of calling them the splash buddies of Steph Curry and Buddy Hield in this instance, obviously off of the Splash Brothers. But I do think that he's going to be a pretty good fit there in Golden State. And the Warriors have made some other moves as well, bringing in D'Anthony Melton and Kyle Anderson. They got Melton on a 1-season deal, signing him to the mid-level exception, and then they got Kyle Anderson on a 3-year deal worth $27 million. D'Anthony Melton is a player that I don't think is very well known in the NBA, but he is a very good two-way player that has dealt with a lot of injuries last year in Philly, and for that reason, I think has sort of fallen off of people's radars. But, this is a very playable piece off of the bench that is going to provide you good minutes. And again, last year was injury. He was dealing with injuries, and, his overall level of play wasn't quite at the level that I'm sure he expects out of himself. But I thought that this was a very underrated move from the Warriors and is going to be a good fit. Now, Kyle Anderson, I don't quite feel the same way. Anderson's a good player. I just don't know if I love the fit in with the Warriors. Now, there is definitely, he's, again, good player, veteran presence. This is a very young Warriors team, really outside of Steph Curry, where you are going to be leaning on minutes from some of these younger players, and Brandon Pajemski, Trace Jackson Davis, Jonathan Kuminga, all the likes there. So adding in some older players there, definitely not a bad move either. Melton actually just 25, I believe he is, 25, 26. 26, just turned 26 years old. So, somebody who feels like a little bit of a veteran there, but actually is on the younger side. And then Buddy Hield, he's 31 years old now. So you're adding in a handful of experience. And it is interesting to wonder about now of, is there going to be another move for the Warriors, because they have been sort of tied to Lauri Markkanen in the past couple of weeks. The Warriors are a team that, like I just mentioned, they have all of these young players. I didn't even mention Moses Moody in that group as well, but they have a lot of these young pieces that are talented players. Do you think that you can lean on them heavily for a playoff run? I mean, it's possible. I wouldn't entirely rule it out. But at the same time, you just let Klay Thompson walk. What is your pitch to Steph Curry if you're the Warriors at this point? What's your pitch of what the vision is? Is it just sort of having him coast to the end there, having semi-competitive teams with the Warriors? Or are they going to do him the justice of giving him one last run? And I wouldn't say the Warriors are close to being championship contenders once again. I do feel like there is a way to make this happen, though. Now, it sounds like from the Golden State party that they do have confidence that Andrew Wiggins has been dealing with all of these off-the-court issues the past couple years, a lot of personal stuff, and that they can revive him of sorts to being that great player that he was during the 2022 playoff run. I would like to think that it's not a diminishing, injuries or skill base that has led to some down seasons for Wiggins, that I really do feel like whatever he's dealing with off the court, those personal issues have taken a toll on him to some degree, but you need better play out of that small forward position. Is it going to be Wiggins internally getting himself right? Or are the Warriors going to go out and make a move? And it's not just the small forward position. I think it's interesting because you look at a couple of these spots where, Andrew Wiggins, we know he has to be better. And part of the biggest reason from that is the fact that they're paying him all of this money. And it's only going to get worse in terms of how much he'll be making. So they really feel like they need to restore some of that value. But also playing in the Western Conference against the likes of Nikola Jokic and the size that the Minnesota Timberwolves can throw at you, they don't really have a big man that you can, pencil in as being a defensive anchor. I like Trace Jackson Davis a lot, even going back to when he was at Indiana in college, and he was a really fun revelation for them last season that was able to play big minutes for them, and so some of his work on the glass was really impressive. But at the same time, there really isn't anybody, and maybe the Warriors can talk themselves into it being Draymond Green playing the 5, but even when you play the Nuggets, obviously it's dealing with Jokic, the post player, one-on-one, and then it's also having a secondary bigger defender that can stop those baseline cuts from Aaron Gordon. So I still feel like they should be looking to add a center as well. Whether they will or not is a different question, but I've been saying for, just about a year that I would love to see. I know he doesn't fit in perfectly in terms of the spacing aspect and next to Draymond Green with the shooting, but Jarrett Allen is somebody that I think is very gettable in the NBA right now, just considering where the Cavaliers are at. And he's somebody that more teams should be calling about. Now, Lauri Markkanen, Brandon Ingram, some of these other guys that are in these trade rumors would also be great gets for them. And if I were them, I would invest into the now, because you still have a Steph Curry who is capable of being the best player on a championship team. Yes, he's a little bit older now, of course, but I don't think that, time has entirely passed him by. They need to have a plan, and I'm just not sure how they are going to play this. I hope that we get to see a fully utilized Steph Curry, but really it's up to the Warriors to decide whether or not that is the case. But we are going to be taking our next break here, and when we come back on the other side, we're going to dive into an Eastern Conference team that is hoping to push the chips in to build around their star player as his years go on in the Philadelphia 76ers with Joel Embiid. and where they stand after they made the move to go out and sign Paul George. So we're going to be diving into that. But first, a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. We're now going to be shifting from the Western Conference to the East and talking about the Philadelphia 76ers, where obviously the biggest storyline of free agency was Paul George signing with Philly. And there was, I would say, mixed opinions on it. I think that objectively speaking, this was pretty much the only move the 76ers could make at this point to even build themselves into a legitimate contender. And again, I don't know if they ever necessarily fully fell out of that grouping, but I would say they were significantly on a tier below some of the other top teams in the East. Obviously the Boston Celtics, but you know, especially with the Embiid injuries, the Knicks, and obviously it's tough to throw the Bucks into that because they were also dealing with injuries. But, you know, headed into next year, if they didn't sign Paul George, I mean, what were you really going to be talking yourself into? And I know that there are still doubts, but, you know, the 76ers are kind of playing it close here in terms of Joel Embiid's now 30 years old. He's never really been healthy in the league from both the regular season to the postseason, and they are going to have to, if they feel like they can win a championship with Joel Embiid as their best player, they have to push their chips in now. And I just don't know how many, you know, good role players they were going to be able to acquire. Now, they've made some other moves as well to try and round out the roster, bringing Kelly Oubre back, who had a really nice year for them last season, adding Andre Drummond. I thought they did an excellent job in the draft with Jared McCain and Adem Bona, but they were still going to need some level of, you know, known reliability. And Paul George maybe hasn't been the number one most reliable star in the NBA the past handful of years, but I think personally the talent is undeniable with PG, and he gets a very bad rep, I feel like, just based off of the fact that he did spend a number of years dealing with injuries, and that has been kind of the entirety of that Paul George, Kawhi Leonard era in Los Angeles was injuries, and the fact that the two of them never ever really lined up in terms of both being healthy at the same time when it really mattered. And I understand that that is a tough investment if you are any team to, especially when Paul George is specifically asking for that fourth year on the end of his deal where he's going to be 37 years old and making $50 million. Like, that is a lot to ask for, absolutely. But at the same time, I just think it was a no-brainer for the 76ers. But now they have this big three, which the big three feels like it is a model that is sort of dwindling, especially in this most recent NBA, and the way that the collective bargaining agreement has that those luxury tax aprons that restrict player movement when you do have all of this big money on your roster. So, the 76ers were just trying to do whatever they could this offseason. And, the big three is going to be great for, 76ers fans to talk themselves into, for the team itself to slap the three of them on some posters and build up excitement. And 76ers fans should be excited because there is a lot of talent on that team for next year. But I still don't know necessarily if it puts them above some of the teams that already were ahead of them. Specifically, the Boston Celtics. I don't think that there is a team in the East, especially the way that they brought back just about everybody from last year's roster. Actually crazy the way that they were able to retain everything after winning the championship. So they are obviously the golden standard. But, behind that as well, you talk about the Knicks, who just added Mikal Bridges. I think the Knicks were already a better team than the 76ers. And they add a player that, has been getting a lot of sort of media fluff over the past week or so, especially, coming to New York. And I know he was technically in New York with Brooklyn, but, being with the Knicks, obviously much better PR there. But, even with that, I think he fits perfectly into what their system already is, which is defense first. And, he can play in. I mean, you talk about obviously the Villanova Knicks and the chemistry that they are already had last year with Brunson, DiVincenzo, Hart. You add Mikal Bridges into that mix as well. I have no doubts that he's going to be able to fit in there. I think I lean with the Knicks over the 76ers, and then you still look at the Bucks as well, who are a team that a lot of people are writing off. I've been vocal about the fact that I have not loved their offseason so far, but I still just trust the star power of, Giannis is a top 2 player in the NBA, and he has Damian Lillard, who didn't have a great year last season, but at the same time, with the player movement, the adjusting, all of that, taking 2 premier players and having one of them take a little bit of a back seat, there is an adjustment period, absolutely. So the Bucks are going to be back, I think, next year. And again, haven't loved their offseason, but I'm just not going to bet against it. Now, it's definitely a conversation between Milwaukee and Philadelphia of who has the upper hand in a playoff series at that point. We're talking about a playoff series while we're sitting here in July right now, which is a little bit reckless, but when you're talking about the overall hierarchy of the Eastern Conference right now, I think it's clear that, the 76ers can put themselves in that position with just about anybody to be competitive, but they're probably the 4th best team in the East. And I haven't even mentioned the Indiana Pacers, who, again, I continue to say, I feel like the Pacers got a lot of disrespect. Yes, they made it to the Eastern Conference Finals in large part because of some injuries that they faced, that the other teams they played, I should say, faced. But even still, the Pacers are a team that is young, hungry. They have a definitive play style that they all lean into, and it works really well. So, I think that the Pacers would be a really tough matchup, honestly, for the 76ers of just trying to run them up and down the court. Now, Tyrese Maxey can obviously lean into that. He's really underrated, I think, in terms of some of his abilities in transition, but you talk about an Embiid and a Paul George where their bodies haven't necessarily been proven that they can consistently stay healthy. And that is an interesting conversation with Paul George as well, where he, since going to LA, injuries have been a massive part of his story. We just covered all of this. It's interesting to consider whether or not Paul George playing 70 games last year, do you buy into that in terms of he's putting these injuries behind him, that he showed that he can consistently stay healthy moving forward? Or was it more of the idea of he was in a contract year and he knew that he sort of had to? I would like to think that you should just look at it from an optimistic point of view. Say he showed he's capable of staying healthy. And, you know, it's a risky bet. Again, like we talked about in terms of a player in their mid-30s who has been unavailable for a number of these big moments. But I don't know. I want to believe in Paul George. He's been one of the most fun players, in my opinion, of the 2010s era. And now we are seeing him, obviously, at this older stage. But it's also, for whatever it's worth, he's going to have a lesser workload on his hands with Joel Embiid being the force that he is, having Tyrese Maxey be the primary ball handler, and Paul George just kind of needs to fit in, which I think he is going to almost seamlessly slide into his role in Philadelphia, and just try and, be that third option, be what Tobias Harris was supposed to be for the 76ers, and, just be reliable. And I think that it's going to work out for Paul George in terms of his fit in with Philly. But that being said, I just feel like there are a lot of very talented teams in the Eastern Conference at the top. And the Boston Celtics are going to be a handful for any of these teams to try and overtake. But let me know in the comments section where you think the 76ers rank up against some of the other teams in the East. But we're not completely done yet with player movement in the NBA offseason. There are still a number of people that are available both in the open market and through trade rumors, and one of those people is Brandon Ingram of the New Orleans Pelicans. So we're going to dive into the latest on the rumors surrounding him after this quick break. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we're going to dive into the conversation around Brandon Ingram. And Ingram, a former All-Star, has been he was probably the biggest chip, I would say, in the Anthony Davis to LA trade of getting Brandon Ingram back. And again, he became an All-Star in his first season with the Pelicans as he won Most Improved Player, but yet to reach All-Star status since then. And last year was probably it's tough to say because of the injury, obviously, and the way that it ended. It was definitely not his best moment with New Orleans, and obviously, the playoffs went really poorly from him, which I choose to not bury him for it, considering the fact that he was coming back from his injury. He had, I want to say, came back for the final regular season game of the year, but he was clearly not 100%, and going up against that Oklahoma City defense where they are young, yes, but they were extremely physical, and Lou Dort had him locked up, and Lou Dort is one of the best defenders in the NBA. So I think it's, again, unfair to leave out the context of the injury that he was overcoming and the fact that he hadn't played basketball really for about a month or so leading into that. So ultimately, Brandon Ingram, it feels like his stock is maybe a little bit on the lower end right now, but he's still a very talented player. And ultimately, I can understand why the Pelicans are not wanting to sign him to this max deal, because they already have so many pieces right now, and especially because of the fact that, you're going to have to pay probably at least Zion Williamson and, some of these other guys, Herb Jones, Trey Murphy could develop into something. And, you also, for whatever it's worth, we saw in the play-in tournament when they were facing the Lakers that Pelicans went on that run with Brandon Ingram on the bench, and again, not an indictment on Brandon Ingram, but more of praising the play of some of these other wings that are on the roster, when I think it was Trey Murphy who was in the game for them, and he was really effective for them. I'm trying to look through my notes here to see if I have the exact lineup that was on the court when they go on this run. It was Jose Alvarado, Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, Zion Williamson, and Larry Nance when they went on that massive run to almost pull off the comeback before Zion gets hurt. But again, I think that there are, younger players on the roster as well, where the Pelicans feel like they can get some level of production from them that can be mostly equivalent to what Brandon Ingram provides them, and pay them a lot less money. Not to mention the fact that, we have this, of course, second luxury tax apron that they desperately don't want to dive into, because this is a team that, we've been saying for years is very talented, but also, was young for a number of those years, and now it feels like they are trying to ramp up to something more than that. There hasn't really been a ton of evidence up to this point, and yes, we should pour all of our savings into this team right now. So they could maybe be there at some point soon, but I'm not quite sure yet. So it is interesting to consider when you look at what the Pelicans have right now. You have all of these backup wings that can slide into a role, for a bigger role that is for the Pelicans, and now especially with DeJounte Murray on the roster, they have a little bit more of a traditional point guard, CJ, who has done a fine job, I would say, of holding down that role, even though that's really not what he is as an NBA player. He can go back to the 2, and then from there, you have Zion, where you'd love to see some point guard minutes from him as well. If you weren't really tuned into the Pelicans last season, there were legitimately stretches during the regular season where he was getting actual point guard minutes, and he looked great with the ball in his hands. So that's something that I'd want to see them, sort of kick the rocks on, or I don't know what I'm trying to say here. Experiment with that a little bit more, but, what they really need right now is a center. They have all of the backup wing options that somebody could fill in for Brandon Ingram. It would probably be Herb Jones in the starting lineup. But as things stand right now, Yves Missi, their first-round draft selection, is the only center on the roster, as Jonas Valanciunas walked in free agency. So that is something that absolutely needs to be addressed, as we talked about, especially in the Western Conference, when there are a number of teams that can hurt you with size, that the Pelicans are going to need to beef up, because I like Missi a lot as a prospect, but he still has a lot of developing to do. And you look around the league at what types of trades could be out there for him. Now, the Sacramento Kings have been the team that has been most recently connected to him. Again, we talked about this a little bit yesterday, but love that the Kings are trying to be aggressive here, but I'm not sure if the Kings can really return anything that is going to be what the Pelicans need. Again, I feel like this can be have the making of a win-win trade of Brandon Ingram for somebody like, again, just talked about him with the Warriors, Jarrett Allen. I would love that trade from both parties, where the Cavaliers get that 3-man that they have been looking for years, and in return the Pelicans can get their defensive anchor who and a player in Jarrett Allen who finally can be, I wouldn't say he's been held back in Cleveland, but I think that the redundancy of him and Evan Mobley has caused for a little bit of underappreciation of what he can be as a rim protector, and you love everything you can get from Mobley, obviously, but Jarrett Allen being the guy, sort of having a team around him that can provide him with opportunities under the rim in the pick and roll game and such. So that would be something I would be, and that team defensively, I mean, outside of CJ McCollum, that team could be really elite defensively. So that's a fit that I would really love to see there. But, you know, I keep throwing Jarrett Allen in all of these trade situations, and we know that the Cavaliers probably aren't going to pull the trigger on that, but I would love to see a, you know, roster reconfiguration there in Cleveland, and Jarrett Allen is a player that I think a lot of teams could benefit from having. But some of the other teams that have been rumored here are the Golden State Warriors in trying to pull off some type of a deal there. I think the Warriors would be an interesting fit. You have a player that is a little bit more on ball and can, maybe that's what the Warriors could use right now. Now, obviously, it is the Steph Curry show, and that's what their focus should be. And now I like adding players like D'Anthony Melton and Buddy Hield that can sort of play off ball and get theirs that way, that maybe that's just the direction the Warriors are going to want to go. Having another player who can, in isolation, get you a bucket could be something they could really benefit from, because for the Warriors, I'm not sure if they really have that right now outside of Steph Curry, and I'm high on a Brandon Pajemski, but, you know, outside of that, there really aren't any isolation creators for them. So it's a fit that makes a lot of sense. I've talked about, I think that Lauri Markkanen would be maybe the best option in terms of what he can do in the catch and shoot for the Warriors. So I'd love to see that happen. But Brandon Ingram could be an interesting one as well, where he gives you a little bit of positional flexibility. He has the offensive creation. He's a lengthy defender, and I would be interested to see how that plays out. Again, not my perfect fit, but a team that I do think makes sense. And then, you know, outside of that, I'm really not sure what the options are. Now, the Miami Heat are another team that have been at least in the conversation with a couple of these stars that have moved around. Financially, it would take a good amount for them to overcome. I do feel like Brandon Ingram in Miami could be, you know, potentially really fun. With him and Jimmy Butler, you have Terry Rozier as well. It's just a bunch of guys who can get you a shot. And, you know, again, I'm not sure if in this case either the Heat necessarily have the assets to pull this type of a deal off, but that would be a sneaky one that I think could put the Heat back in. I don't know if we're going to see full finals level contention again, but they are better than an 8 seed. And last year they were bad, but so I'm not saying they should have been higher last season, but I think that the overall organization can absolutely do better than they did last year, and that would be an interesting fit to me. But let me know where you want to see Brandon Ingram end up in the comment section. Obviously, in these types of deals as well, sometimes it is a surprise team that just sort of slides in and makes the big move. So we're not sure yet because there hasn't been much movement on this yet. It could be a slow-moving process from here on out. But we're going to be taking our next break here, and when we come back on the other side, want to dive into a little bit of the NBA Summer League, as that's going to be kicking off on Saturday. So we'll run through the overall layout of the Summer League, the schedule, and some of the key storylines to watch, as tomorrow we are going to see Bronny James play his first game in the NBA. So stick with us, and we will be right back after this quick break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we are just over 24 hours away from the beginning of the NBA Summer League. And I understand that the Summer League is something that it's not everybody's cup of tea, and I get probably a little bit more invested in it than I maybe should, but I think it's really fun to see some of these players at the ground level and just sort of understanding what some of the expectations for, we watch them in these college settings, and it's great because it's very, it's playing into a team system and such, and not that the Summer League isn't that, but I think that you get to see a little bit more the showcasing of an individual player when it comes to the Summer League. And again, I know it's maybe a little bit ridiculous being as into it as I am, but it's just a fun thing to sort of, get to see these young players. And this year they are doing, once again, the 3 different iterations of the Summer League. The first is the California Classic, which is what's kicking off tomorrow. The Warriors, Lakers, Heat, Kings, Spurs, and Nuggets will be participating there. Did I just say Nuggets? It's because they are not. It's Warriors, Lakers, Heat, Kings, and Spurs, and Hornets. Sorry about that. The second is the Salt Lake City Summer League, which is 4 teams: the Utah Jazz, Memphis Grizzlies, Oklahoma City Thunder, and Philadelphia 76ers. And then starting July 12th are the official games of the Summer League. The actual Summer League that is official with the playoffs and everything, with all 30 teams. So we start with the California Classic, which kicks off tomorrow, and the first game we get is none other than the Los Angeles Lakers, who are going to be playing the Sacramento Kings, and we will have our first look at Dalton Connect and Bronny James for LA. I haven't been super positive about Bronny James throughout this draft process and such, and it's mostly because of the external factors of, how the media has been covering it and such, but, I'm very excited to see Bronny play, actually get out of these conversations of, nepotism and whatnot, and just get to see him actually play basketball, because it's been a highly anticipated thing. And listen, I understand that Summer League can also be a little bit overblown at times. I remember watching Victor Wembanyama in his debut last summer, and having the overall, reputation around him being very negative. And Wemby was, this extremely highly touted prospect that it was a little bit disappointing almost, but even still, you just got to see what he was made of in terms of, he really did not shoot well last summer, but you could see the framework of, wow, he is going to be special, this 7-footer who is trying things that we've never seen 7-footers try before. So it can be, if Bronny doesn't play well, he's going to be killed online, and it's going to be unfair. Now, hopefully that doesn't happen, but ultimately, again, I think that it is just really special to have this type of a moment. So I am looking forward to that. Dalton Connect also, though, really is the more basketball relevant, important part of this conversation, considering the fact that the Lakers are trying to compete next year, and in order to do so, they're going to need help from other players stepping up. That was clearly not the case we saw when they faced the Nuggets last year. LeBron and Anthony Davis played well, but outside of that, they had very little help other than the one D'Angelo Russell game. And with the Nuggets, they had help coming from everywhere. Even when Jamal Murray was struggling for a lot of that series, you had other people stepping up. And that's what the Lakers are going to need. Dalton Connect could very well be a legitimate rotational piece for the Lakers next season. So I'm excited to see sort of what he looks like in an NBA arena. I don't have I'm curious how much he's going to be sort of the main creator and initiator of a lot of this action. He was very hands-on during his college experience, and that won't be the case once he plays with the official Lakers. Now, in the Summer League, maybe they give him a little bit of runway to try and orchestrate his own action, but I am really curious to see how he plays with other, NBA talent players around him and what he looks like off the ball. So that is something that I'm looking to consider. Some other top players to watch in the Summer League this year. Brandon Miller is on the roster, and he is probably going to be the best player in the Summer League this summer. Now, we'll see how long he does actually play, whether or not the Hornets would pull him out after a couple games. I am pretty much always for sending your younger players to get this type of an experience. And unless there's an injury concern or anything, I see no harm really in just getting them some extra game reps. And in this case too, Brandon Miller playing for a Hornets team that doesn't really have much going on around him anyways, but for a lot of these younger players, getting some experience sort of away from the star players on the team and being able to, flourish a little bit more, get the experience as, one of the top guys. For whatever it's worth, Victor Wembanyama will not be playing in the Summer League this year as he is with the French national team. So you can turn your attention to that instead if you want to watch Wemby this summer, but not going to be playing in the NBA Summer League. The Hornets overall, though, are going to be one of the more fun teams, I think, to watch this summer, considering the fact that they also have their more recent draft picks of Tijon Salon and KJ Simpson. So Hornets, it's going to be interesting. I think a lot of people got very excited about the video that was going viral on Twitter of their new head coach, Charles Lee, and some of the culture that he was trying to establish, almost just coaches with a ton of energy. And I do think that it is going to be infectious for the rest of the team. So I'm definitely looking forward to that. But it's some of the other players to definitely keep an eye on. I am fascinated to see how Zachary Reshapes performs, the number 1 overall pick for Atlanta, of course. And this is going to be his opportunity to show, his reputation coming into the NBA is that in a perfect world, he's going to be a really good 3-and-D player. That's not super encouraging for a number 1 overall pick. And he's going to probably, you would think, have opportunities with the ball in his hand during the Summer League here. Keep in mind, he played professionally, too, in Europe. So it's not like this is going to be some sort of drastic shift in terms of level of difficulty. I think it's going to be really, really interesting to see how he's able to perform and handle the pressure and such. So we'll see about that. And then one of the other teams I'm really interested in is the Washington Wizards, because I want to get the experience. I watch some of these international prospects when they're overseas, but getting to see them in an NBA setting in a much more accessible type of platform is going to be really interesting to see. So having Alex Sarr and seeing what he is going to look like in the NBA as well. And for whatever it's worth, throwing Bub Carrington in there, I think, you can talk yourself into that being a little bit of a fun duo in terms of the pick and pop and some of the flashes of athleticism that can be displayed there that will be fun to watch. But that, again, kicks off this weekend, so can't imagine I'm going to get a ton of ability to talk about it on the show here because of the lack of interest, but I'm a really big fan of Summer League, so I'm looking forward to it this year. But we're going to be taking our final break now. When we come back on the other side, we've been doing a lot of basketball the past week or so. We're going to dive into a little bit of MLB and talking about the Boston Red Sox, who are coming off of a series sweep and are in contention for a playoff spot. But as the trade deadline approaches, there is not a lot of optimism that the franchise is going to buy in at the deadline. So we'll talk about whether or not that is the right decision after this quick break. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back. Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast for our final segment of the day, where we are going to be talking a little baseball and the Boston Celtics or the Boston Red Sox, that is, who just pulled off a series sweep of the Marlins. Keep in mind, obviously, it is the Marlins who are having a pretty abysmal season at 30-57, but it puts the Red Sox yet again in a wild card position, currently holding the 6th seed in the American League, half a game ahead of the Royals. Now, it's going to be hard for the Red Sox to hold on to it, I would have to imagine. You look at who is behind them in the standings with the Houston Astros, and even I would throw in there the Texas Rangers as well, who Rangers are 39-48. It's going to take a lot, I would think, for them to, pull their way back into this conversation, but the Rangers are a team with a lot of talent and with, some injuries that have not gone their way, but especially in that rotation, looking at guys like Jacob deGrom, who is very possibly going to come back later this year. And the Rangers, I just feel like a year off of winning the World Series, it would be pretty unlikely that they're just going to, die and, sell off all of their, pieces and be sellers. It is interesting. I was listening to the Section 10 podcast, and Jeff Passan, of ESPN, who is incredible. He was talking about the idea that now that we have this expanded playoffs in the MLB, that it almost kills the trade deadline a little bit, because all of these teams are still sort of in the conversation, which is something that's interesting to consider, and another reason why I feel like if you're talking about the Red Sox here and what types of moves they are going to make moving forward, that I don't believe they are going to do anything substantial, that there probably won't be. What the Red Sox need right now, probably more than anything, is a starting pitcher. Now, their pitching staff has performed very well relative to expectations coming into the year. Now, you wonder, coming off of this Marlins series too, where we saw Brian Bayo have a pretty good outing in 6 2/3. Nick Pivetta had a nice outing as well. Now, it's in Miami. It is a pitcher-friendly ballpark, and the Marlins are just about at the bottom of the league in terms of, power hitting. But I do think that there's maybe something to build on there. That being said, coming into the year, the expectations for the Red Sox were never really going to be great in terms of the overall pitching staff. It was a little bit of a neglected group, you could say, and allowing all of these free agents that it seems like at the end of the day, it might not be the worst thing that they didn't invest into a Jordan Montgomery or a Blake Snell, but it is still a group that feels pretty underwhelming. Now, Tanner Houck has been incredible. I think he should be in the All-Star game. We have the reserves being announced this upcoming weekend, so we'll see whether or not he gets in there. But he has been incredible. The one thing I am most concerned with him at this point is the idea of Houck. I don't think has ever pitched. I can go back and look at the stats, but I don't think he has ever pitched more innings than he has so far in this season. With his most recent outing, he got up to 107 and 2/3 innings pitched. That is already a career high in a season. His previous highest was last year, where he pitched 106. So it's very much on the table that we could see a little bit of regression. I mean, he just had his worst start of the season last week against the San Diego Padres. So we will see if he's able to sort of right the ship there. But there is definitely at least some level of concern there. Outside of that, you have other players who have done pretty well for themselves in Pivetta. Cutter Crawford has been a little bit shaky after having a good start to the season. Pitching is something that they could definitely address. I mean, it feels like you can say that about just about any team, but the Red Sox definitely are in that conversation, and it is interesting when you think about, for the Red Sox right now, who are definitely not a prime championship contender, and the Red Sox fans at this point just feel like they want to see a playoff berth more than anything. So I think that when you talk about whether or not they should be buyers at the deadline, it's important to consider that it would be nice, I'm sure, to generate a little bit of excitement moving forward here down the stretch of the season. I feel like, again, Red Sox fans have just been hoping for competitive games throughout the entirety of the year, and we've been getting to August the past couple years and seeing the Red Sox really falling off. But I don't know whether or not it would be worth them actually putting future assets into going to get a player that will be, playing marginal innings for the Red Sox, and if they're going to be in the way of the development of some of these young players that they have tried to develop this past year. And, if anything, I do think that they probably lean more in the direction of being sellers. Now, for the exact reasons I was just talking about, it feels like that would go against, anything that the Red Sox fans are asking for, which is just being competitive for a longer stretch of the season. But you look at somebody like a Kenley Jansen, who had a very eventful Game 3 in the series against the Marlins, where it almost looked like he tried to give it away. If it weren't for Jarren Duran making an incredible throw from center field, the Marlins would have walked that one off. But ultimately, again, Duran makes an incredible play, and this goes into, I believe it was the 12th inning, where they are ultimately able to pull it out there. So I don't know. I think that ultimately here the Red Sox are just in a little bit of a weird position where they're fun right now, and the expectations are pretty low ultimately, so being fun is kind of enough. But we'll have to see how this progresses here, how they choose to act moving forward in terms of whether or not they're going to be buyers or sellers at the deadline. But let us know in the comments section how you feel about it. But that is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Remember to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. Check us out on social media as well for more exclusive short content, and we will be back on Monday afternoon, same time as always, 2:00 p.m. Eastern. So have a great weekend. We will see you then. Take care.
Let's go. wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna